Hello and welcome to today's webinar, The Fastest Path to the Cloud and Disaster Recovery as a Service with VMware. Thanks so much for joining the webinar. This is going to be a really cool presentation. I want to give a special thanks first to our friends over at VMware for supporting us on the event. Before we get started, there's just a few things that you should know about the format here of the event. We do want these to be educational. We encourage your questions there in the questions box. Many of you have already said hello or good afternoon, and we love to see that kind of communication from the audience, but we also want your technical questions on the topic. We know that many of you are dealing with challenges around disaster recovery, ransomware threats, and you want to be able to recover from ransomware and other malicious events as quickly as possible. And that's what this event is all about, the fastest path to the cloud and disaster recovery. So we encourage your questions during the presentation. We'll be doing a live Q&A session at the end of the event, so keep those questions coming. We also have a number of resources there in the handouts tab. We want to call your attention to those. There is a link to the VMware Ransomware Recovery Solution Brief. We encourage you to check that one out. There's also another link to the VMware Cloud on AWS solution overview. So make sure that you download those two PDFs. And there's also a link to an exciting new announcement related to VMware Cloud on AWS there. A new instance type is now available. So make sure you check out those resources in the handouts tab. And then at the end of the webinar today, I'll be announcing the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card door prize. If you're watching this on demand, recorded, of course, that drawing would have already occurred. The prize terms and conditions can be found in the handouts tab. And then to maybe make the Q&A a little bit more interesting and maybe shake some questions loose if you're not quite sure if you should ask a question, we also have our best question prize today for an additional Amazon $50 gift card. The prize winners will be selected and contacted after the event. All right, so with that housekeeping information out of the way, I'm excited now to welcome today's expert presenter. Welcome to Jamie Maillard, who is a Senior Cloud Solutions Architect at VMware. Jamie, it's great to have you on the event today. Take it away.
Hello and good afternoon. I first want to take a moment and say thank you for joining us today during this session. I'm Jamie Maillard, and I am a Senior Cloud Solution Architect here at VMware, supporting our VMware Cloud Solution portfolio. Over the last several years, I've had a lot of conversations with customers looking to migrate their on-prem virtual machines into cloud solutions. And some of the most common challenges that I've seen them experience is specifically around the amount of time, the amount of effort, and the cost associated with migrating into native cloud environments such as Amazon EC2 or to Azure. Specifically around the refactoring or the replatforming onto a different hypervisor. So about 6 years ago, VMware and AWS entered into a partnership, very tight partnership, strategic partnership, that brought together VMware, the leading virtualization enterprise class solution for on-prem data centers, and AWS, the leading public cloud provider for cloud services. And this brings together the best of both breeds in a very tight partnership in 2016. We launched VMware Cloud on AWS at the next VMworld in August of 2017, and have continued to expand the solution several times over the last 5.5 years to where the solution is today. So what is VMware Cloud on AWS, or VMC? So looking at that center box there, VMC at its core is the full VMware software-defined data center stack of vSphere, vSAN, and NSX for compute, storage, and networking, with a dedicated vCenter and some Tanzu components to assist with container management and modern apps. This is all running on bare metal, standard AWS infrastructure. And what that means is there's no nesting of hypervisors. This is vSphere on bare metal AWS hardware. What it also means is that this is VMware, exactly as you're using it today. vCenter is vCenter. And that provides you with a consistent operational environment. You get to use the same third-party tools that you're using today. You're using vCenter like you are today. And what that means is the administrators don't have a learning curve. There's no new consoles. There's no new tools. You continue to operate exactly as you are today, making it very seamless and easy to migrate those workloads from on-prem into the cloud. Now, the benefit of us working with AWS is we can take advantage of what they operate from a cloud standpoint, the speed, the agility, the flexibility. And so, whereas normally it would take a days or a week to fully stand up a cluster from nothing to being ready to start running workloads, with VMC, you answer about 4 questions. Where do you want it? How big do you want it? What's your AWS account? And what do you want to use for your management network? And then you hit deploy. And in 90 minutes to 2 hours, you have a fully deployed, fully configured SDDC ready to accept your workloads. Additionally, from an agility standpoint, once that cluster exists, if you need to add additional capacity for any reason, in a matter of about 3 mouse clicks, you can tell it to add a number of additional hosts, and those hosts are available in the cluster, fully configured and operational in less than 10 minutes. Now, that same process, that same speed is, since VMware is responsible for hypervisor down in this environment, you're only responsible for your security and your network, your security and networking and your workloads. VMware is responsible for hypervisor down. We monitor the environment, and if there's any kind of problem, we will step in to remediate that. And in most cases, we don't try and fix anything. If there's a problem with the host, we're going to replace that host. And again, that same process, less than 10 minutes, the capacity is replaced. And in most cases, it's not even an HA event because the problem is detected prior to the host actually going offline. But not everything is going to operate in the cloud. There's going to be workloads that make sense to leave on-prem at times. And in that case, what we're able to provide is represented by that upper arrow there between the 2 vCenters. It's called hybrid linked mode, or HLM. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to authenticate the vCenters such that you can see both your on-prem environment and your cloud SDDC from a single UI. You don't have to log into different places. You don't have to have different credentials. You log in with a single set of credentials to see everything and manage everything from a single pane of glass. But as I was talking about earlier, what about that migration process? That's represented by the bottom arrow, VMware HCX, or Hybrid Cloud Extension large-scale migration. HCX is an included component of VMware Cloud on AWS. And what it allows is it allows you to go in and create move groups, select 100 VMs at a time if you want, and then schedule their failover or migration at any point in the future. It will then sit there and replicate those virtual machines in the background. And when the cutover window comes, it will do a graceful shutdown of the OS, a final synchronization of the data, and then power the virtual machine on in the cloud. But in addition to that, HCX does provide the ability to very easily extend your on-prem networks in a layer 2 extension. And if you do that, you can keep the same IP addresses as the VMs have currently on-prem. And instead of the graceful shutdown, you can actually perform a replication-assisted vMotion, and your VMs can migrate without any downtime. The last aspect here is that right-hand box, the AWS services. And you see another arrow there connecting VMC with those AWS services. That is a series of elastic network interfaces, or ENIs, very high speed, low latency connection between the SDDC and a native AWS VPC belonging to you. With that, you're able to communicate directly between virtual machines and native AWS services at very high speed, low latency. This gives you the opportunity to start implementing hybrid applications where maybe you have the database running as a service in native AWS, where you have the application server and the rest of the application stack running in VMC on standard vSphere virtual machines. You can do the same thing with S3 and a number of other AWS services, all at high speed, low latency, because they'll be running basically within the same data center. So with all of this, as I mentioned, VMware, this is a VMware owned and operated solution. Support is all provided by VMware. You don't have to know anything about AWS if you don't want to. And VMware is responsible for hypervisor down. You never have to worry about performing another vSphere upgrade, or do I do NSX first or vCenter first or vSAN second? That's our responsibility. And as we're performing upgrades and maintenance, we always provision additional capacity into your environment to make sure you have access to your subscribed capacity. So let's look at some of the most common use cases. Next-gen apps, containers, hybrid applications, as I mentioned earlier, application modernization. That is absolutely a use case that a lot of our customers are looking to leverage, and taking advantage of the Tanzu components as well. Cloud migrations, I've spoken quite a bit about this already. The speed and agility of HCX, large move groups. One of the things to keep in mind about application or cloud migrations is industry studies have shown that if you simply lift and shift your on-prem virtual machines as they are from an on-prem data center into a native cloud environment, they cost about 40 to 60% more to operate in a native cloud environment than they do on-prem. What we've seen with VMC over thousands of deployments is it's actually a 15 to 25% cost savings over 3 years to operate those same virtual machines within VMC versus on-prem. The next is data center extension. Maybe you need burst capacity. Maybe you want to migrate to the cloud, but you still have a strong on-prem investment that hasn't fully depreciated yet. As I mentioned with HCX and hybrid link mode, there are ways that we can integrate the two on-prem and cloud environments to make simple operations possible. Virtual desktops is a very popular use case. I had one customer early on in the pandemic that all of a sudden needed 450 help desk users working from home. I first spoke with them on a Wednesday morning. We had an environment provision for them on Thursday. They deployed Horizon on Friday. They did their user acceptance testing over the weekend, and they went live for 450 users on Monday in production. So it can help from a disaster protection standpoint, as well as desktop bursting. And disaster recovery. It doesn't make the most sense to have a large DR environment deployed in a second data center with all of the hardware costs associated with it and all of the operational costs associated with running an entire data center on-prem. And so from a DR standpoint, we can be a new DR. Maybe you don't have anything today. We can replace what you're doing existing, or we can enhance what you're doing currently. And we'll talk about that more in a few minutes. One of the other major benefits of working and partnering with AWS is their global footprint. VMware Cloud on AWS is currently available in 22 regions worldwide. You see them represented here. As AWS continues to add additional regions, we continue to expand into those regions as well. Let's talk more about disaster recovery, specifically VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery, or VCDR. This is an on-demand solution delivered as a service. And in the on-prem environment or the protected location, because it could be a cloud environment as well, the only thing you have to deploy is the DRAS connector. It's a single OVA delivered as a service, so you don't have to worry about keeping it up to date or patching it. And that DRAS connector communicates with the on-prem hosts and vCenter and virtual machines and is responsible for the replication. That replication goes to a scale-out cloud file system that resides in the cloud. And that scale-out cloud file system has a lot of benefits. It is rapidly scalable. And the way that it's implemented and orchestrated, as you're taking different snapshots of your on-prem virtual machines, it stores them in an air-gapped and immutable state. So you can't have cross-infection of prior points in time. Because one of the benefits of VCDR is you're able to take snapshots as frequently as every 30 minutes and retain whichever ones of those points in time that you want. And so one of the most popular retention policies is what we refer to as a ransomware retention policy, where what is kept is 30-minute snapshots for 4 hours, 4-hour snapshots for 1 or 2 days, daily snapshots for a week, weeklies for a month, and then monthlies for 6 months or 9 months or even longer. And each one of those snapshots, as I mentioned, is air-gapped and immutable from each other, meaning that you can restore each one of those points in time individually. And so you can bring up the most recent and have access to your most recent data, even though that virtual machine might be infected. And then you can iterate back until you find a clean copy of the virtual machine. and then merge the data into that. The SaaS orchestrator is what provides the ability to create protection groups or a logical grouping of virtual machines that you want to recover as a unit, as well as creating DR plans, which is the actual step-by-step workflow of recovering those virtual machines. The recovery location is a VMware Cloud on AWS software-defined data center. The scale-out cloud file system is mounted to that SDDC as an NFS data store. So you don't have to rehydrate from S3. You don't have to reconstitute anything of that nature. These snapshots are stored as VMDKs within the scale-out cloud file system and are able to be instantly powered on once the SDDC is available. And I say once the SDDC is available because it doesn't have to exist at all times. If you want, you can deploy the SDDC only when you want to run a test or when you have a DR event. As I mentioned earlier, that process takes about 2 hours. And then on average, it takes 1.5 hours to 2 hours to configure your networking. And then you can start recovering your virtual machines. If you need a recovery time objective lower than 4 hours, then you could deploy what we refer to as a pilot light, which is a minimum footprint SDDC, 2 hosts or maybe 3 hosts that exists at all times. This allows you to pre-configure all of the mapping, as well as pre-configure all of the networking, so that when you have an event, you can immediately begin powering on your virtual machines without waiting. And so your recovery time goes down to however long it takes to boot your virtual machines. Through normal operations, the other thing that is going on at all times is your DR plans are continuously having a consistency check run against them. It's about 24 points, checking network availability, folder structure, recovery resources, RPO compliance, and many, many other points. That consistency check is run every 30 minutes and is very recognizable within the UI as well as through audit reports as to whether or not it is passing that consistency check. When your DR event is over, it's very simple and straightforward to reverse that flow and replicate only the deltas back to your production site. So you don't have to resync the entire virtual machine. You only are going to be syncing the delta that occurred during the event. So then on-demand disaster recovery, we have that instant power on with the scale-out cloud file system. You have that ability to have a pilot light to reduce the RTO. Because this is running on VMC, it is the same VM format. You're not converting in either direction. And we'll talk more about it later, but there's rapid ransomware recovery as well. This is all SaaS, so you don't have to worry about keeping things up to date. All you do is configure which virtual machines you want to protect and how frequently you want to protect them. I just mentioned the DR health checks or consistency checks. And because this is running on VMC, you only have to pay for the capacity when it's needed. You don't have to have an entire DR data center stood up with all of the hardware for the worst case scenario at all times. You only pay for that capacity during tests or during a DR event. The cloud storage is highly efficient with dedupe and compression. So it significantly reduces the amount of capacity needed because it is a robust file system. And we also have optimized failback so you don't have to replicate the entire virtual machine back on-prem after an event is over. So as I said, I want to talk a little bit more about ransomware. Earlier this year, a report was done. Over a third of all DR events are caused by ransomware. And the average cost is over $4 million. From a VCDR standpoint, when you look at ransomware recovery, there's really 5 steps to identify it, to protect yourself from it, to detect it, and then where VCDR comes in is to respond and recover. Now, a lot of times the first 3 fall to the security team, whereas the last 2 fall to the infrastructure team, and there can sometimes be some disconnect there. And so we announced at VMware Explorer a few months ago, VMware Ransomware Recovery for VCDR. This is a ransomware recovery as a service solution that brings in the ability to very rapidly iterate through and identify what is going on. You're able to deploy an on-demand isolated recovery environment, which is a brand new, clean VMC software-defined data center, and then leveraging the NSX components within there, very easily create VM by VM network isolation. This means that you can recover a point in time and then investigate it with next-gen antivirus and behavioral analysis in the same UI without fear of reinfection, without an isolated recovery environment and VM network isolation. You could be 10, 15 virtual machines into recovery, and then the next one reinfects and undoes all of the work that you've done prior to that. And it needs next-gen antivirus because simple file scans don't work anymore. Most of these are fileless attacks. And we need behavioral analysis because as you start opening things up, as you're going through the recovery process, something might wake up. And so you can very easily see with that behavioral analysis, oh, something has changed. I have a lot more network traffic now once I opened up that network port or whatever it might be. We also provide guided restore point selection. So what this provides is a very easy to understand and follow identification of change rate within a virtual machine or within a snapshot and entropy or compressibility. And so if you see your compressibility from one snap to the next go from 60% to 0%, that's a good indication of an encryption event having occurred. Or if you see your change rate suddenly increase dramatically, that's a good indication that something has changed outside of the norm. And so you can very easily use this guided restore point selection to identify which is the appropriate point in time that I need to recover. And then leverage that ransomware recovery workflow to bring those virtual machines up in that isolated recovery environment with that network isolation, constantly performing scanning with next-gen antivirus and behavioral analysis. You can very rapidly iterate through your points in time to find that clean virtual machine as quickly as possible. And because this is on VMware Cloud on AWS and VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery, all of those recovery points are air-gapped and immutable. And it's that same NFS mount that allows for instant VM power on. And with that, I once again want to say thank you for your time this afternoon. And at this point, I say let's open it up to Q&A.
All right. Great presentation, Jamie. I really enjoyed that. I learned a lot. I know the audience did as well. And if you have a question, now is the time to get it in. I should also mention the resources there in the handouts tab. Don't forget about those if you haven't checked those out yet. Jamie, I'm going to go ahead and start with this first question, which I think really pertains to the information there on the screen. And that is, when it comes to the instances, what instance types are available in VMC on AWS?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are currently 3 instance types available for VMware Cloud on AWS, and I'm going to go ahead and abbreviate that VMC from here on out just to save some time. The first one being an i3 instance, which has approximately 36 physical cores, a half a terabyte of RAM, and approximately 8 terabytes of usable storage. There's the i3EN, which is about 1.5 times the size for compute and memory, but about 4 times the size for storage. And at VMware Explorer, we did announce a new instance type on the screen there, the i4i. It has officially launched and is generally available. And that one is approximately twice the compute and memory of the i3 and 2 to 2.5 times the storage.
Very nice. Super scalable. I love that. And so there's a related question here from Michael, and that's about, when it comes to sizing your VMware Cloud on AWS environment, he mentioned that these, AWS instance types can be a little confusing. Does that still apply with VMware Cloud on AWS, or is sizing done in a different way?
Yeah, I've heard that before as well, that the letters and numbers can get a little bit confusing. And I just said the same things, letters and numbers to describe our instance sizes. That being said, we don't have dozens of instance sizes. We have 3, the i3, the i4i, and the i3EN. And they're dedicated hosts. So you get the full resources. So I saw in your question you were asking, do I get more of a I purchased X amount of memory and Y number of cores? Yes, you do get that because you get the entire bare metal host. So whatever the specifications of that host is, you have access to all of those resources.
Great. Yeah, that sounds like that could help to make things so much more simpler for a lot of folks out there. So another great benefit to using VMware Cloud on AWS. Here's another good question. They're asking, if I want to use HCX to migrate workloads to VMware Cloud on AWS, do I need to have NSX deployed on premises?
No, you don't. That's the easy answer. A little bit more complete is HCX is just a fleet of appliances. Doesn't matter what your architecture is on premises, as long as you're on a currently supported version of vSphere. You can use HCX to replicate the virtual machines and fail them over. The only requirement regarding migration is if you want to do a live vMotion using HCX. You are required to be on a distributed switch on-prem. So if you're on a standard switch, you can still use HCX to migrate. You just can't do the vMotion piece.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. And then let's see, here's another good one. They're asking, can I run a test on a DR plan in VCDR?
Absolutely. One of the huge benefits of the VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery platform is that ability to run tests at will. You can simply go into the DR plan and say, I want to run a test, and it will put it into an isolated network so that it doesn't conflict with any DNS or any of your existing production workloads. It's going to sit there. You can make sure that the plan runs the way you want it and that you can access the virtual machines the way that you need to, but still have it be completely isolated, non-disruptive to production and non-impactful to ongoing replication.
Very nice. And then this is a good one from Brandon. He wants to know if this solution could help them with their SOC 2 compliance challenges.
It's an interesting question because there's a little bit of nuance to it. So first of all, VMware Cloud on AWS does have a SOC 2 Type 2 certification. So the environment and the platform itself is SOC 2 compliant. The reason I say there's a little bit of nuance is that applies to the hypervisor down, which is what VMware is responsible for. Since you as the customer are responsible for all of your workloads and security sitting on top of the hypervisor, you still have to follow all of the appropriate compliance rules, whether it's SOC or any of the other compliance requirements out there. But the platform itself does have a SOC 2 Type 2 certification that is available upon request.
Nice. Yeah, it sounds like that could help out. What about question from Michael wants to know, can I still get access to the various AWS unique services such as their own database? How does this connect with AWS again?
Sure. So VMware Cloud on AWS, it doesn't really touch directly any of the native AWS services. However, if you want your vSphere virtual machines to interact with native AWS services, you can absolutely do that. There's two kind of primary ways for that traffic to flow. One I mentioned earlier is the Elastic Network Interfaces, or ENIs, that directly connect the VMware software-defined data center with what we refer to as a connected VPC or native AWS VPC where you're running those services. The other path to connect those two sides of the coin is to leverage VMware Transit Connect or Transit Gateway to route that traffic over to, if you have a larger AWS footprint than a single VPC, which most customers do, you're able to leverage VMware Transit Connect and AWS Transit Gateway.
Nice. Nice. And then what about the scalability, either up or down of this? Michael's asking, can I spin up and spin down resources, based on demand? How does that work?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, the speed and the agility is there. 2 hours to deploy a cluster, 10 minutes to add hosts. So spin up, spin down is absolutely there. You can grow in a matter of 10 minutes to add those hosts up to whatever the maximum cluster size is. You can remove them when you don't need them, and this is all in increments of 1. The removal process does take a little bit longer than the add, because since we're leveraging vSAN, there is data stored on the drives in that host, and that data has to be redistributed across the remaining hosts of the cluster. So removal takes a little bit longer than the 10 minutes. Now, what I would say is you're not necessarily going to want to see growth and shrinkage on an hourly basis, but on a daily or a weekly, if you have a spike in your business at the end of every month and you need 10% additional resources, well, sure, go ahead, provision those extra resources only for that short period at the end of the month, and then remove them when that compute cycle is over. And then you can add them back and remove them.
Very cool. I mean, that's certainly not something that's going to happen in an on-premises data center. So that's really powerful. They're a really powerful feature of VMware Cloud. Here's a good one from Jeff, who wants to know, can I run the same VMware image on AWS as well as Azure and GCP?
Yeah, so I can interpret that two ways, and I'm going to answer both of them. So if the VMware image that you're referring to is the actual ESXi image of the hypervisor, you don't actually have access to that ESXi image. That is all handled by the deployment, the automated deployment of the software-defined data center that we provide. Now, that being said, there are VMware solutions on both Azure and GCP that use a similar automated process to deploy a software-defined data center on those hyperscalers as well. So the other way that I can interpret that question is regarding the actual virtual machine image itself. And in that situation, that virtual machine image can run on any vSphere platform, whether it's on-prem vSphere, whether it's on VMware Cloud on AWS, whether it's on the Azure VMware solution or Google Cloud VMware Engine. The same virtual machine can run wherever that is.
Nice. That's very cool. Very cool. All right. Well, we've answered so many great questions. I'm afraid we're starting to run out of time here. One final question, though, I want to ask you, Jamie, and that is, if folks are interested in this, there's a lot of great resources. There's the link on the screen. There are resources in the handouts tab. What do you recommend for folks who want to get started?
Absolutely. Definitely take a look at the PDFs that are linked in the handout section. Great resources to maybe get a little bit deeper on the solution. Follow the link on the screen, learn about that new instance type. I believe that there's a promotion going on, at least for a period of time, on that new instance type. And most definitely the easiest way to get more information and learn more, reach out to your VMware core account executive, and they can loop in whomever your specialist is. I cover a certain part of the United States, but there's a lot of me here at VMware that will support you and your account, and we can certainly get additional information to you. If you need to see a demonstration, we've got a live environment that we can walk you through as well.
Excellent. All right. Well, this sounds like, just as it was advertised, the fastest path to cloud and disaster recovery as a service, a great option for a lot of companies out there. Michael out in the audience said, this sounds like a wonderful option to make AWS more realistic for us. So it sounds like this could help a lot of companies. Jamie, thank you so much for your expert presentation today. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Take care.
And thank you to VMware, of course, for supporting the event today. Before you go, don't forget about the resources there in the handouts tab. You can easily download those PDFs before you go and check them out after the event. And with that, I'm excited now to announce the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card. This is going out to William St. Croix from Kentucky. Congratulations to William St. Croix from Kentucky. We'll reach out to you to deliver that gift card, and we'll also be reaching out to our best question prize winner as well. I hope that you learned a lot on the event today, and I hope you have a great day. Take care, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.